Greek legend of Icarus. A boy is granted a wish as old as humanity itself, to fly. He flew with wings of feathers and wax, and his desire to soar higher and higher became his undoing when the sun's heat melted his wings, sending him plummeting to the sea. For centuries, humans have pursued the same wish, despite all odds. And in modern times, the desire to fly has led many to find their own way, to soar to the sun. Gliders, which fly by the power of the wind, and other less traditional aircraft, have provided an alternative to conventional airplanes. But unfortunately, even something as pure as a glider is dependent upon gasoline for flight. And in the mid-1970s, it seemed as if this dependency would be swiftly forced to a premature end. The Middle East has long been the world's premier supplier of oil-based products. The Iran Revolution in 1979 sent shockwaves through the global economic community. Many predicted that this was the beginning of the end, that oil was an unreplenishable commodity that was too politically unstable to support an increasingly dependent planet. The auto industry was the hardest hit. Even the daily commute was disrupted by long lines at the gas station. In many areas, stockpiling was common, turning the shortage into an emergency and often forcing the government to intervene. Many were now arriving at their local pumps to find gas overpriced, rationed, or not available at all. Gasoline was clearly a habit that needed to be kicked. Not only would the gas guzzlers of the 60s and 70s need to be replaced by smaller, more efficient cars, but people everywhere would need to drastically change the way they led their everyday lives. In the days of the oil crisis, more people carpooled, rode buses, trains, and bicycles. Although it disrupted many lives, the oil crisis did have many positive, long-lasting effects. The development of alternative forms of energy from replenishable natural resources, such as the wind, water, and the sun, were funded. It was now the time to stand behind the promotion of a cleaner, healthier, more self-sufficient environment. Here at Lasham Gliding Centre, in the heart of the English countryside, another innovation in alternative energy came to life. In 1976, Frederick had a marvelous idea. Although an architect by profession, his true passion has always been flight. Known for haunting workshops and airstrips with his movie camera, Fred saw that the time was ripe for a new kind of aircraft. One that would not depend on gasoline, but rather it would be powered by the sun. With friend and aeronautical engineer David Williams, he set out to build the world's first solar-powered airplane.
Yeah, it was Fred who first came to see me with this idea of a solar-powered airplane. We'd met each other before on the man-powered airplanes. I'd designed and built the man-powered airplane for Southampton University in 1960. Fred made a film or two about these things, and then he came to see me again. The whole thing was designed so that the energy from the sun would be collected by the solar cells and fed directly onto the motors. and it was designed to take off and climb and fly. There aren't any existing airframes which are light enough. So we designed a special aeroplane to suit the job. We asked, well, can we do something like this? And I thought about it, and I thought, well, yeah, we could. And we could do it on our own, because I could actually do it in my workshop, which I was building at the time.
With Dave's workshop and Fred's designs, they began preparation for the construction that was to consume their lives for the next 2.5 years. After having found the lumber yard that could provide the thin strips of spruce needed for the featherlight design, they began stocking up on supplies. Their daily lists included everything from fiberglass and resin to bathroom scales and clothespins. In no time at all, the little shed on the farm in Northampton was filled to capacity, containing all the necessities of a major construction site. The project was underway. Working from detailed blueprints, they carefully measured and calibrated each individual piece as it became part of the greater design. Because experimentation with solar power was at such a high point in the late 70s, it was only a matter of time before another team of passionate aircraft designers would emerge with a solar-powered aircraft. Knowing this, Fred and Dave kept their activities secret, withholding the excitement of their accomplishments until the day that their aircraft would eventually take flight. Much of the work was laborious and repetitive, but after hours upon hours of sanding and gluing, a glimpse of the final product could be seen in skeleton form. One day it would be merely strips of wood, the next a fuselage. All of the metal components used on the aircraft, like this gearbox, were cut and shaped from scratch in order to form parts that were both strong enough to be airworthy and light enough to function in a solar-powered plane. Although the designs were new and untested, Fred and Dave combined their architectural and aeronautical engineering skills to fashion each individual piece into the working parts of a functioning airplane. As the months passed and the plane began to take shape, it was clear that the dream was no longer only in Fred's mind. It had become a reality. And by the fall of 1977, almost a full year had passed since Fred first approached Dave with the idea of a solar-powered plane, and the components of the aircraft were already beginning to take recognizable form. In order to fulfill the competing goals of strength and low weight, they built the propeller out of fiberglass, a relatively new material that in the 70s was considered to be at the height of small construction technology. Although they often sacrificed fashion for function, their attention to detail and commitment to sanding helped shave dozens of pounds off the structure that would need to support the weight of an average-sized man. The lightweight propeller was hollow, formed in 2 fiberglass pieces that were glued together, allowing it to remain light enough to run on a motor driven only by the sun's power. Its construction, like many of the wooden parts of the aircraft, involved a repetitive sanding and planing process. Fred and Dave meticulously shaped a plasticine mold to fashion a perfectly sealed propeller edge. sturdy design of the undercarriage was built to withstand a less than ideal landing. And with the addition of a small wheel to absorb some of the shock, they were now ready for their first round of tests. All they needed to do was find an unsuspecting guinea pig willing to endure the famous drop test. Although they worked for the most part in secrecy, Fred and Dave did entertain a few select visitors. But such visits were rare, as it was rumored that guests were often put to work without so much as a cup of tea. But there were some visitors that were simply untrainable, like Nugget, the horse.
While we were building this airplane, Nugget would look in through the windows, grinding his nose and trying to destroy the window.
I think it got jealous of the airplane, and we thought he was going to gallop into these months of work. You know how cowboys sort of sometimes are shown being dragged along with their stirrups? That's what that horse did to me. I was dragged along with one-footed like a cowboy, yes. And I was bumping along on the ground. I just managed to grab hold of the bloody horse stirrup, pull myself on these. So my style of riding isn't really good. I wasn't brought up for this. I was brought up to be an aircraft designer. Yes, we had this large pig called Arthur, didn't we? The boar, Arthur. He was quite a friendly chap. They were the original free-range pigs. They ranged everywhere.
Oh, I wonder where they are now.
I think they're in the...
Somebody's
Throughout the cold winter months, they diligently persevered with the construction of the wing. Built to be assembled in 3 parts, it, like the fuselage, was made of thin strips of spruce and generous amounts of glue. With the help of a few dedicated volunteers, they fabricated dozens of identical pieces, which, although they looked like snowshoes, would eventually form the bone structure of the wing. Each teardrop-shaped piece had to be individually planed and sanded so that there were no rough edges to puncture the delicate covering that was to be applied. Each snowshoe was then placed side by side along the framed length of the wing. In minutes, the form took shape. Looking like the excavated remains of some prehistoric creature, the wings lay in wait for one purpose: to fly. And just as bones need muscles and tendons to hold them together, so did the fragile wing structure. With wood, metal, and yet more glue, the wings were fortified to withstand moderate winds and sudden gusts. Using a special heat-shaped foam material, Dave attached the leading edge. The wing was now ready for testing, just in time for spring. Using bricks left over from the building of the workshop, weights were made to test the wing's strength.
Well, if I was going to sort of trust myself to this structure, I had to test it first. So we load tests, and in testing wings, you turn the wing upside down, and then you load on lots of weights on it to simulate the air loads. Ideally, if you had a couple of wings, you'd test one to destruction, but we only had one wing, so we tested it as far as we dared, and with bricks.
And the tests were a success. After 2 days of heavy testing, the wing proved its strength and stability. They were now ready to attach the covering, to put the skin over the bones. They had chosen a material called solar film, a lightweight plastic often used in the construction of model airplanes.
It seemed quite the ideal material for us because it was such a lightweight film.
And we had a problem of trying to sort of go around in three-dimensional curves.
Yeah.
And that solved the problem, and it was quite easy to apply.
Yes, it produces a wonderful surface.
Using double-sided tape, they attached the film in small sections. The film shrank when exposed to heat, so using either an iron, a heat gun, or even Dave's patented space heater method, the solar film quickly became a smooth, taut, aerodynamic surface. By midsummer, the body of the plane was ready for flight, and Fred and Dave turned their attention to the question of solar power. Using the electric engine of a model airplane, they began a long series of tests on different brands of photovoltaic cells, checking each for energy output and efficiency. The next hurdle was to find the right motor.
One of the key things was the Bosch motor that we were able to find. Bosch had made this motor, 1 horsepower motor for mopeds,
Oh,
I think they were.
Yes, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we had a good source of lightweight electric engines from Bosch.
Coupled with the energy collected by hundreds of efficient solar cells, the superlight moped motor would be powerful enough to keep the plane in flight for long distances. After installing the motor, which they'd positioned on a stem at the nose of the plane, Fred tested the propeller thrust by holding a bathroom scale against the tail of the plane as the motor pulled the fuselage forward. It was not until they'd completed the finishing touches that they realized that money was running low. Almost every penny had thus far come from Fred's pocket, and after he'd spent more than £6,000 on solar cells alone, they realized that they had a new challenge.
First one, apart from just designing the thing to work, that was to raise enough money and find the right solar cells and stuff like this. And I remember, since it was my job to find the money, I went to quite a few people trying to get sponsorship.
Fred and Dave became pioneers of product placement, filming every filler, fiber, glue, and gadget in the hopes that someone, somewhere, would donate money to the cause of solar-powered flight.
But towards the end, it was so frustrating trying to find the money, as I think we only had about a third of the solar cells required in the end.
With the limited amount of money that we had available, Fred bought all the solar cells that we could afford. The solar cells we had, theoretically, would have been enough for steady, level flight.
They had originally hoped to cover the wings completely with solar cells, but with little money left, they needed another plan. And there was an added pressure. Fred had begun hearing rumors that other groups were on the verge of capturing their goal of the first solar-powered flight. Whatever decision they made, they would need to make it fast.
We just went ahead in secrecy because we thought everybody else was in on the act. We thought perhaps the Japanese were in on the act, and perhaps the Americans. I think these were so we worked in secrecy, really.
We had to get it, I mean, the thing to do was to get it going as quickly as we could.
They persevered in their quest to find a willing sponsor, canvassing any corporation, no matter how large or how small.
But remember, at one stage, towards the end, I even approached DuPont for some sponsorship because we were using one of their materials for the covering, the clear covering, Tedlar. And so I went to them, I said, we have this idea of flying to Paris.
We had sort of ideas about military applications, and in fact, I suppose if we could have thought of a military application, we wouldn't be here now. We'd have been. But there weren't applications. It was simply something that we wanted to do.
With time running out and progress stopped, they decided to install a temporary battery.
We could have dispensed with the battery during the cruise part of the flight. We simply had a battery so that we had enough power to carry out the testing. The battery was there so that we could do the testing properly.
Today, almost 15 years later, Fred realizes the significance of that decision. At the time, it seemed like the ideal solution to their problem. By leaving the plane out in the sun all morning, the solar cells would collect enough light to charge the battery, which would in turn power the motor, enabling the plane to take off and climb independently. But more importantly, this was a solution they could afford. As with any innovation, Fred knew that they would eventually need to make compromises in some areas. But it did seem as if all of the pieces were coming together. By the fall of 1978, it seemed that they had accomplished many of their goals. It had been almost 2 years since Fred and Dave began working together on the groundbreaking idea. Since that time, they had developed countless blueprints from which they painstakingly shaped and crafted hundreds of working parts. The assembly period was long and exhausting, requiring intense concentration and commitment to assure the precision of each individual part. From a skeleton of spruce, they had created a light, graceful aircraft powered only by the warming rays of the sun and the energy of its creators. Each unique component, no matter how small, was as responsible for the realization of this unique aircraft as was the original seed in Fred Toe's mind. At long last, the entire plane had come together. From wingtip to wingtip, and from tail to nose, its sleek design seemed a model by which all aircraft designers should follow. And they were soon to discover how others would interpret the idea of solar-powered flight. But what Fred needed at this point for his creation was a name.
At some stage we had heard from someone that the Americans had done this thing. We were still building, and we had secretly given the rights to a newspaper. But somebody said they read in Newsweek or the Time, Newsweek, that somebody had already done this. So we frantically went to the nearest library to find Newsweek, and we searched through the latest copy of Newsweek then, and we found an article on solar power, and right at the end there was an article on two gentlemen in England secretly building a thing called Solar One in a farm. And I have a feeling we hadn't even called our airplane by any name yet. And so I think the name stuck, and we actually called it Solar One. Of course, we realized then we were reading about ourselves.
As Solar One waited in pieces for its chance to fly, Fred and Dave attended to more practical matters, namely transportation. They had arranged to carry out their flight tests at Lasham Gliding Center in Hampshire, about 200 miles away. Building a giant trailer to hold Solar One seemed like small potatoes compared to their previous work. They set into yet another round of sanding and painting. But at least this time, the end was clearly in sight. By now, it was late autumn, and there was little time left to fly before the cold winter months set in again and work would have to stop. They worked quickly, for they knew that if they did not fly before January, someone else living in a warmer climate surely would.
We painted it outside, and the flies were getting on it. They were all dying on it, and we had to carry on. I mean, we had to sort of paint the flies on, and one of the secret was to actually use the brush so hard that the legs came off, and the fly would come off, and the legs would stay on. You know what I mean? You know, you just paint on.
Flies or not, they were ready to hit the road. As the trailer was loaded up piece by piece, their excitement and anticipation mounted. There were still many questions unanswered. Although they had conducted rigorous structural tests at the workshop, how would Solar One hold up in flight? Would the motor give enough power to lift the pilot? How fast and how high would she fly? And the most important question, the one that they asked themselves daily in the backs of their minds, would they be the first? At Lasham Gliding Center, they assembled the components of the aircraft into its final form. Solar One would remain here while Fred and Dave continued to test the aircraft for strength and structural soundness before the long-anticipated flight using solar power alone. With the assembly complete, Solar One was at long last wheeled out onto the runway. She was ready for her first round of tests. Using a cable which ran from the nose of the plane to a car at the end of the runway, Solar One was pulled into the air like a kite. Without solar cells or propeller attached, the aircraft was tested for its gliding ability, as well as its sturdiness upon landing. But the weather had begun to turn, and they feared that too many tests could cost them their goal.
I think we had some concern that somebody in America was going to get there first. Whatever happened, we wanted to be the first. We really wanted to be the first people to fly a solar-powered aeroplane.
Alone on December 19th, 1978, David could wait no longer.
I remember the day very well. We did it in the morning. The only other person there was Derek Piggott, who's the chief flying instructor here. It was cold. It was so cold, in fact, there was ice forming on the wings. We charged up the electrics using the solar cells. We pushed it out onto the runway. I jumped in, strapped myself in. Derek held the wings level, switched on the power, and off it went. But it hopped into the air, seemed to fly all right, but it seemed rather underpowered at that time. There was so much ice forming on the wings, and the conditions were deteriorating, so we decided to pack it in for the day. But that was the day of the first flight.
I think we still kept it very secret because we wanted to do better flights. And it wasn't until towards quite late in 1979 when the American Larry Morrow claimed that he had made the world's first solar-powered flight that we came out into the open and said, no, sorry, we had actually done it in 1978 on December the 19th.
They had achieved the ultimate goal, the first solar-powered flight. Believing that the pressure had finally subsided, they made numerous repairs and alterations in preparation for a more formal and witnessed flight. Among those was the search for a lighter and more experienced pilot. They found this new pilot in Ken Stewart, ex-British national gliding coach and author of the Glider Pilot's Manual.
I got a phone call, or probably Dave Williams contacted me at one point and told me about this aeroplane which Freddie was building and asked me if I'd like to fly it, because I'd flown gliders with large wingspans and which flew at slow airspeeds, and therefore I was used to handling airplanes of this nature. You never refuse to fly another airplane, someone else's airplane, especially something that no one else has flown before. So it was a good opportunity to get my hands on it. The first time I saw it was, well, literally the first night I flew it. I'd never seen the thing before. I never knew anything about the production or anything. It was all great secret until I was asked along, and that was it.
Fred and Dave clearly had the right man for the job. He nestled himself easily into the cockpit, making it seem as if the aircraft had been tailored to him alone. Ken not only proved that the aircraft was flyable, but his slight body weight and expert flying ability turned out to be the perfect recipe for mastering this unique and unconventional airplane. As Ken quickly became comfortable at the controls, Fred and Dave began to plan Solar One's unveiling, her first press flight. Calling upon aircraft enthusiasts and the local media, they set the date for June 13th, 1979.
The day was very similar to it is today, only probably worse. We had thunderstorms going through fairly regularly, and we were just trying to find a gap in the thunderstorms.
Although the weather was less than ideal, the solar cells had collected enough energy from the available light to power a perfect takeoff.
I was so happy with the takeoff and how well it was going that I was quite happy to, instead of just stopping the engine and landing ahead, to actually open up the engine again, start it up again and fly a bit further. The thing that probably I can remember most about the actual flight was the silence, because you expected a roaring engine in front of you when you take off, and all we had was this relatively quiet whir, probably not even as noisy as an electric drill.
As he neared the end of the runway, Ken switched off the motor and gently glided to a smooth and safe landing. The cars containing the media raced to catch up while Ken emerged triumphant.
There's nothing much changed, I don't think. It's still the old airplanes.
No, I recognize it now, coming down here, and I didn't realize you had come to almost the end of the runway here. This is amazing, eh?
Yeah.
Because I do remember the sheds there, the hangars.
It was quite exciting being part of it, especially since at that point, as far as we were concerned, there were no other solar aircraft that were that close to flying.
Although they had completed this flight many times before, for Fred, Dave and Ken, this was indeed their moment of glory.
It was good fun. And of course, being 15 years younger at the time than I am now, it was quite an adventure as well.
Although their flight did receive some coverage from the press, there were critics. Many felt that the addition of the battery could not legitimately constitute pure solar-powered flight.
We don't claim anything. We claim we flew under battery power but charged by the solar cells, and we still claim that. And basically, it's not in the purest language, that is not pure solar-powered flight, but that was solar-powered flight because the power came from nowhere else but the sun.
But the attention of the press had turned to the United States, where another solar-powered plane was being unveiled. Designed by Paul McCready, the California-based Gossamer Penguin was used as a solar test bed.
Everything happens around this Pasadena, Mojave Desert place, this Californian sea, because conditions there are quite ripe for all these things to happen. You've got the weather, right? That's the important thing. You've got the type of people going there, looking for new things. You know, without California, some of these legislation on pollution would have never come along.
Ironically, Penguin was sponsored entirely by DuPont, and with solar cells donated from NASA. The Penguin completed many successful flights, but it was McCready's next plane, the Solar Challenger, that was the real eye-catcher. Using every available surface to house the solar cells, the Solar Challenger flew without the aid of a battery. Fred could only wonder about what might have happened had they found sponsorship for Solar One.
There must have been a connection between the idea that I proposed. I mean, unless two ideas were being proposed concurrently, that McCready actually flew Solar Challengers somewhere in the early 80s and did the very flight that we would have liked to do. But it was a great flight. I mean, McCready's a great man.
On July 7th, 1981, the Challenger flew from Paris to London.
Well, it's a typical story. The Americans have the money. But that's no discredit to McCready because he is a genius.
While the Challenger went down in the history books as the world's first purely solar-powered flight, Solar One was sold to a fellow enthusiast who hopes to fly it again in 2003 for the 100th anniversary of the Wright brothers' flight.
In no way would I rank myself anywhere, or David or I or anyone in this team anywhere near the Wright brothers. That was aviation. This is peanuts.
Although Solar One may be resting under a thick layer of dust in an attic, Fred and Dave have both, in their own ways, kept flying. raising sheep on a farm only a few miles from Lasham Gliding Center, Dave spends most of his free time teaching others the art of soaring. With parachute on and the canopy latched tight, Dave prepares for another weekend journey. As an instructor at Lasham, he has unlimited use of the gliders, and he takes every chance he can get. As an experienced aeronautical engineer and pilot, gliding allows Dave the opportunity to remain close to the joys of flight he has experienced as a dreamer, designer, and inventor. Like the solar-powered aircraft Dave designed and built with Fred years before, gliding provides an exciting alternative to traditional forms of flight. This glider may still rely on a gasoline-powered tow plane to hoist it into the sky, but the benefits are hours upon hours of soaring, with the green patchwork quilt of the English countryside passing far below.
Really, solar power, like, is simple. It really is one of the simple things to do. You just have to have the money and the patience to put it together. Mathematically, it's very simple to prove the whole thing works. Just go and build the aircraft. There's very little development to be done, you know, if you want to buy solar power. You just have to make the airplane light enough.
And that is precisely what Fred set out to do. After Solar One had achieved its goal, he immediately began planning a totally different kind of aircraft. Constructed in the shape of a flying wing, this new plane had an unusual twist. It was inflatable. Using a vacuum cleaner to pump it up, Fred demonstrates the design to his family for the first time.
Sad truth is solar cells are not becoming that efficient. The sad fact also is, another fact is that batteries development haven't progressed. We knew actually it was difficult to produce anything better in terms of batteries. This we understood even back in the 70s, and we weren't going to wait around for that, so we did what we could. But I have a large feeling that solar power will go nowhere except for reconnaissance, high altitude unmanned reconnaissance. Nothing will happen until the development of solar cells makes a quantum jump.
While waiting for the technology to catch up with the designs, Fred continued to experiment with inflatable aircraft, testing models and drawing up blueprints. The result of these experiments was the Phoenix, an enormous aircraft designed to fly by manpower alone. It stretched the length of a gymnasium when inflated, but could be transported easily on the roof of Fred's car. Fred Towe is a man determined to push the boundaries of flight, motivated purely by a natural instinct to do what has never been done before.
What other way can you get into the air? Something like that. What are the different ways? Is it a new power plant? Is it a new material? Is it a new structure? Is it new aerodynamics? Just keep on pushing. It's always in the mind, you know. I think if we had known that we were going to run into such financial problems right at the beginning, I think perhaps none of us would have started. But once you start on these projects, you know, you just don't give up. You're living in hope from day to day, and that's the idea. carried us through quite well. But that is the nature, that is the passion of building aircraft. I mean, once you're in it, you're completely absorbed in it. You just don't let go until it flies. And many people do go into these things, and their planes never fly. They keep on going.
I think the motivation between me and David was really, it was there, and let's do it before anybody else, in fact. No, I think when you're young and something, you just do it because it was there, and you had
it. I think we did it.
We had
we were compelled. We were compelled to do it. We had nobody. There were no prizes. We just did it because we wanted to.
Fred, Dave, and others like them use their skills, determination, and creative intellect to pursue alternative forms of flight. These modern-day inventors chase their dreams despite constraining financial burdens, limited resources, and the constant risk of failure. They are pioneers, relentlessly pursuing a dream that dates back before Greek history: to soar to the sun.